Millionaire invites mistress to dinner, pregnant wife walks in and overturns the table, leaving him humiliated. Once upon a time, Elizabeth Quinn believed her marriage to millionaire hotel magnate Adrian Quinn was the pinnacle of romantic bliss. She had the sprawling mansion in upstate New York, the luxurious penthouse in Manhattan, and a husband whose dazzling charisma could light up any room. Yet beneath the facade of elegance, sinister cracks began to appear, hinting that all was not well in paradise. When rumors of another woman crept into Elizabeth's life, she chose to ignore them until one fateful evening. Unbeknownst to Adrian, his pregnant wife marched into a private dinner he had arranged for his mistress and unleashed a firestorm of drama that left everyone stunned and humiliated. Elizabeth Summers grew up in a small, cozy neighborhood in Queens. Her parents, Margaret and David Summers, owned a modest bookstore called Summers and Stories, best known for its inviting reading nooks and artisanal coffee. Throughout her youth, Elizabeth found enchantment in the stories she read, tales of knights, princesses, and sweeping romance. Little did she know that her own life would soon come to resemble the most dramatic of novels. At the age of 23, Elizabeth met Adrian Quinn at a college fundraiser. Adrian was a young entrepreneur with a burgeoning fortune, the heir to the Quinn Hotel Group, a prestigious chain of luxury hotels spanning multiple continents. Drawn to Elizabeth's warmth and intelligence, Adrian offered to donate a hefty sum for the college arts program, all while making charming conversation that made her cheeks flush. After that night, he pursued her with a fervor that felt right out of a storybook, sending flowers to her family's bookstore, surprising her with tickets to off-Broadway shows, and even showing up on her doorstep in the pouring rain just to say, "I miss you." By the time Adrian proposed a candlelit dinner in the rooftop restaurant of his flagship Manhattan hotel, Elizabeth was convinced she had met her true prince. The wedding soon followed, a grand yet surprisingly personal ceremony in the Quinn family's ancestral estate. Marble statues, an orchestra playing Bach, a train of elegantly dressed guests, everything about that day shouted opulence and tradition. But Elizabeth insisted on small, personal touches, a reading from her favorite novel, a table filled with homemade desserts from her mother's recipe box, and a heartfelt tribute to her late grandmother, who inspired her love for literature. Adrian, for all his wealth and social standing, seemed to treasure these unique details. "It makes us different," he would say, a fond look lighting up his blue eyes. "It makes us real." And for a while, Elizabeth truly believed that despite the vast gulf between their upbringings, they shared a bond built on mutual affection and respect. After the whirlwind of the wedding, Elizabeth moved into Adrian's penthouse, overlooking Central Park. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows each morning, illuminating a life that felt magical. She volunteered at a children's reading program, satisfied that she could pursue her passions while Adrian managed his corporate responsibilities. Their nights were spent sharing takeout on the plush living room carpet, discussing future travel plans, and laughing over inside jokes. In those early days, Elizabeth convinced herself they were immune to the pitfalls of wealth and power. She saw Adrian as her knight, flawed perhaps, but faithful and steadfast. If she noticed the occasional flicker of arrogance in his demeanor, she dismissed it as mere eccentricity. Love, as the fairy tales promised, would conquer all. As time progressed, Elizabeth observed faint but disconcerting changes in Adrian's behavior. They started off subtly. He would check his phone incessantly during dinner, vanish into his study for long, hushed phone calls, and seemed distracted whenever she tried to chat about her day. Initially, she blamed it on the pressure of business. The Quinn Hotel Group had recently embarked on a significant international expansion, with Adrian at the helm of negotiations that would make or break their European ventures. But what began as understandable stress morphed into something more personal. Adrian grew irritable, snapping at Elizabeth for trivial matters like accidentally misplacing his favorite cufflinks or forgetting to remind him about a brunch appointment with his business associate, Leonard Reeves. Apologies from him became rarer, replaced by curt acknowledgements and half-hearted attempts to be affectionate. Elizabeth found herself brushing off her parents' concerns. Margaret Summers noticed a certain tension in her daughter's voice whenever Elizabeth called home. "Is everything all right, dear?" Margaret would ask. "You don't sound like yourself." Elizabeth's answers were always guarded. "Mom, I'm fine, just busy." She told herself she was simply adjusting to the complexities of being the wife of a prominent businessman. Even her close friend, Samantha Morales, who worked at the bookstore with her parents, pointed out the unease. Samantha visited the penthouse once and remarked later how Elizabeth seemed on edge. Whenever Adrian joined them, Elizabeth practically tiptoed around his moods. "He's under pressure," Elizabeth insisted. "This European deal is huge. Once it's settled, he'll be back to his normal self." Yet, the more she rationalized Adrian's aloofness, the louder that small voice in her head became, warning that something was off. She tried to approach Adrian gently. One evening after dinner, Elizabeth set aside her own restlessness to confront the matter. "I know the business deal is critical," she ventured, her tone soft but earnest. "But is there something else worrying you?" Adrian dismissed her concerns with a bland smile. "Just corporate politics," he said, eyes flicking to his phone. "Don't worry about it." Then he retreated to his study. She heard the door click shut behind him, and something in her chest tightened. That night, she lay awake in their king-size bed, staring at the dark ceiling, wondering why she felt so isolated when her husband was just down the hall. When rumors began circulating about Adrian frequenting late-night bars with business associates, Elizabeth tried not to jump to conclusions. If there was one thing she prided herself on, it was her faith in her husband. But deep inside, she couldn't shake the sense that the cracks in their relationship were widening cracks she was desperately trying to fill with denial. Months crawled by, and Elizabeth clung to hope that a positive change could reignite the love story she'd once known. Then, on a chilly autumn morning, she received unexpected news. She was pregnant. She'd suspected something was different for a few weeks: unusual fatigue, sudden queasiness at random times, and an odd, almost spiritual feeling that life was changing within her. A visit to her longtime physician, Dr. Rachel Peterson, confirmed that she was indeed about 8 weeks along. At first, Elizabeth felt an electric sense of joy. She imagined telling Adrian over a candlelit dinner or leaving a creative clue around the penthouse for him to discover. She pictured his face lighting up at the prospect of fatherhood. It was a moment she had cherished in her mind since the day they got married, a child forging an unbreakable bond between them. Yet, the moment came and went, with far less fanfare than she anticipated. She prepared a romantic dinner of roast chicken with rosemary, set the table with heirloom china, and even draped twinkling fairy lights around the dining area. Adrian arrived home 2 hours late, barely acknowledging the decor before slumping into a chair. Elizabeth mustered the courage to share her secret anyway. "Adrian, I have news," she said, heart pounding. "We're going to have a baby." He blinked, his expression blank, as if processing data rather than responding to an emotional revelation. After a protracted pause, he offered a flat, "That's unexpected." Despite a half-hearted attempt at congratulations, Elizabeth sensed an underlying tension. Instead of excitement or affection, he raised logistical questions. "Did you see a doctor? Are you certain? What's the timeline?" Deeply disappointed, Elizabeth tried to hide her hurt. She had longed for him to scoop her into an embrace or to beam with pride at the thought of fatherhood. Instead, Adrian merely muttered something about how this might affect his business schedule, left his half-eaten meal on the plate, and retreated to his study. A hush settled over the dining room, where the only light came from the flickering fairy lights Elizabeth had once believed would transform the night into a romantic memory. In the following days, Adrian remained distant. While he didn't outright reject the pregnancy, he showed little enthusiasm. Elizabeth threw herself into reading baby books and planning for the future, everything from potential names to nursery decorations. She tried to share these details with Adrian, but each new conversation felt like an imposition on his time. Late at night, when he was supposedly working, Elizabeth would quietly stand by the half-closed door to his study. She often heard hushed phone calls, laughter that felt unsettlingly flirtatious, and an occasional mention of a woman's name she couldn't quite catch. Each time her heart clenched. She couldn't shake the feeling that while she was celebrating a new life, Adrian might be drifting away into a secret one of his own. Elizabeth's suspicions grew by the day. Too many oddities occurred for her to brush them all aside as coincidences. Adrian came home at irregular hours, wore cologne so strong it suggested he was masking someone else's perfume, and offered evasive answers whenever she politely inquired about his late-night meetings. No matter how gently she broached the subject, he always snapped back, citing the demands of running a global hotel empire. Feeling isolated, Elizabeth confided in Samantha Morales. "I'm pregnant, and he doesn't seem to care," she lamented over coffee in the bookstore's staff lounge. "He's always somewhere else, whether it's physically or mentally." Samantha's brow furrowed with concern. "You have to talk to him more directly," she advised. "Maybe he's stressed, but if there is another woman, better to know than live like this." Fearing confrontation, Elizabeth tried a subtler approach, first surprise lunch visits to Adrian's office. She'd arrive with a homemade sandwich or a small container of leftovers, only to find his secretary stumbling over excuses. "Mr. Quinn stepped out suddenly," or "he's in a meeting that might go on for hours." The sympathetic glances from the staff told Elizabeth enough. They pitied her, the wife who was out of the loop. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when she finally got her first concrete lead. Adrian had forgotten his phone at home in his rush for an important conference. Elizabeth rarely snooped, but the incessant buzzing drew her attention. A name flashed repeatedly on the caller ID, Caroline Gray. Something in her gut twisted at the sight of that name, a feeling of ominous dread that she couldn't explain. After the ringing subsided, Elizabeth noticed a cluster of unread messages. She hesitated. Then, with trembling hands, she opened them. "Miss you, darling. Don't forget our plans tonight. Saw a beautiful dress today. Can't wait to show you. In private. Hope your wife isn't suspicious." Elizabeth's stomach dropped. Her eyes clouded with tears as she scrolled, each line confirming the unthinkable. There was a clear intimacy between Adrian and this Caroline Gray. Week after week of rendezvous were documented in these messages, from dinners at exclusive restaurants to late-night business trips at boutique hotels in Brooklyn. The darkest realization hit her. While she was decorating a nursery, Adrian was busy entertaining another woman. In a daze, Elizabeth set the phone down and retreated to the bedroom. A tear-soaked pillow welcomed her heartbreak that night. When Adrian finally returned, close to midnight, she pretended to be asleep, unsure whether to confront him immediately or strategize a different approach. She could feel the walls of her once treasured life closing in on her. While her baby represented hope for the future, her marriage felt like a sinking ship, a betrayal so profound that it threatened to shatter her entire world. The tension between Elizabeth and Adrian mounted in the days that followed. Her discovery of Caroline Gray's messages gnawed at her mind every waking moment. She wanted to confront Adrian, but fear of his possible reaction and the chaos it might unleash kept her silent. The stakes had never been higher. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and still clinging to a shard of hope that Adrian might come to his senses. The breaking point arrived one evening when Adrian casually announced he'd be working late again. Standing in the foyer, Elizabeth mustered her courage and said, "I found your phone messages." "I know about Caroline Gray." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were fierce. Adrian paused, coat half on, and stared at her with an indecipherable expression. "Don't start, Elizabeth," he said, exasperation coloring his tone. His lack of denial was confirmation enough. A chill crept over her, like a wave of cold realization that she'd never truly known this man. Her composure cracked. "I'm pregnant with your child," she cried, voice breaking. "And you're out, parading around with another woman?" Adrian's face hardened. He set down his coat, gesturing for her to lower her voice. "You don't understand the pressures I'm under," he hissed. "Caroline she's important to business connections. It's not serious." The dismissive tone, the total lack of remorse, triggered Elizabeth's anger in a way she hadn't felt before. She demanded that he end things immediately. She demanded loyalty, if not for her, then for the baby they had created. Adrian, however, only sneered. "Don't be naive. Marriages in the upper echelon aren't always about love. It's politics and image," he said, as though explaining a lecture on economics. Elizabeth felt her heart pounding violently, tears pooling in her eyes. "That's how you see our marriage?" she asked, voice cracking. "An arrangement?" Adrian's silence confirmed everything. Without another word, he grabbed his coat and walked out, leaving Elizabeth alone in the cavernous penthouse that now felt like a prison. She collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing into the cushion, feeling betrayal and heartbreak consume her. For the first time, she wished she had never married into wealth, never left the simple, honest world of her parents' bookstore. Over the next few days, Adrian avoided her questions and her presence. She cried herself to sleep, questioning every decision she'd made. Yet, amid the despair, her maternal instinct began to sharpen. She told herself that she had to protect her child, even if that meant standing up to Adrian and facing the possibility of walking away from the life she'd built with him. Because it was clear now, if a confrontation was needed to safeguard her unborn baby's future, she would face it head-on, no matter the emotional cost. With the shards of her shattered illusions still piercing her heart, Elizabeth decided to take control of her destiny. She couldn't watch Adrian continue his illicit affair in plain sight. If he refused to value their marriage, she would have to preserve her own dignity and that of her unborn child by confronting the situation head-on. First, she visited her parents, Margaret and David Summers. Nestled in the cozy back room of their bookstore, she poured out her story in halting sobs. Her father looked thunderstruck. Her mother, equally horrified, bristled with protective indignation. "You should never have to beg a man for loyalty," Margaret declared, hugging Elizabeth tight. Her words reaffirmed what Elizabeth already knew, that love was worthless if it came with humiliation. Samantha Morales also rallied to Elizabeth's side. She arrived at the penthouse, rolling up her sleeves as though prepared for battle. Together, they made a list of Elizabeth's options, from confronting Adrian publicly to consulting a lawyer. Samantha voiced her concern. "Look, you're pregnant. You don't want to endure a long, stressful court battle, but neither can you let him walk all over you." That was the moment Elizabeth learned from a discreet tip that Adrian had booked a private room at a new French restaurant, Le Papillon d'Or, for an upcoming evening. The reservation was suspiciously timed to coincide with one of his so-called business dinners. Caroline Gray's name was on the guest list, disguised as an associate. A singular, bold plan took shape in Elizabeth's mind. If Adrian wanted to carry on a secret rendezvous with Caroline, she would ensure it was anything but secret. Rather than quietly stepping aside, she intended to catch him in the act. No excuses or spin possible. It was a dangerous gambit, one that could spark a scandal among New York's high society circles. But Elizabeth had reached her limit. She refused to allow Adrian to humiliate her in private any longer. Once she resolved to confront him, fear and exhilaration washed over her in equal measure. She envisioned walking into that sumptuous dining room, the hush descending as she revealed the truth behind Adrian's business dinners. She worried about the effect on her reputation, but that worry paled in comparison to the sense of righteous indignation fueling her every step. She was not just a scorned wife, she was a mother-to-be who deserved respect. "Let's do this," she told Samantha, voice tinged with determination. Samantha nodded, offering her unwavering support. Their plan was set in motion. Elizabeth would arrive unannounced at Le Papillon d'Or, catch Adrian and Caroline in the midst of their deceit, and force them to reckon with their betrayal in the most public way possible. Le Papillon d'Or had rapidly become the talk of Manhattan's elite. A luminous crystal chandelier presided over the main dining room, casting a warm glow on tables draped in pristine white linens. Renowned chef Marcel Dupont's menu of haute French cuisine drew celebrities, tycoons, and politicians alike. It was precisely the kind of upscale venue Adrian Quinn favored for his business gatherings, where he could cultivate the image of a refined, successful mogul. On the night in question, Adrian arrived at the restaurant with Caroline Gray on his arm. She was an elegant, striking brunette, dressed in a sleek off-shoulder gown that left little to the imagination. They were ushered into a private dining room just off the main hall, a secluded space adorned with fresh orchids and filled with the soft strains of a live violinist. For anyone observing from a distance, the scene appeared idyllic, a handsome millionaire and a sophisticated companion enjoying a romantic evening. But unbeknownst to Adrian and Caroline, Elizabeth was already in a hired car, parked discreetly on the side of the building. Her friend Samantha waited a block away, ready to provide backup if things spiraled out of control. Elizabeth's heart thundered as she smoothed her navy blue maternity dress. She felt her baby move a gentle kick, reminding her of the high stakes at play. This wasn't just about personal pride, it was about demanding the respect and security that she and her unborn child deserved. She got out of the car, inhaled the crisp night air, and walked through the restaurant's grand entrance. Heads turned. Even in her current emotional turmoil, Elizabeth radiated a dignified aura. The maitre d', recognizing her as Mrs. Quinn, looked momentarily flustered when she calmly said she needed to be shown to her husband's private room. A flicker of worry crossed his face, but he complied, guiding her through the bustling main dining area toward the closed doors of the 6IP suite. Inside, Adrian and Caroline were mid-conversation, sipping fine wine and sampling amuse bouches. The moment Elizabeth opened the door, the room fell silent. Caroline's eyes went wide, like a deer caught in headlights. Adrian froze, a slice of foie gras poised on his fork. The violinist faltered, missing a note as the tension in the air became palpable. "Adrian," Elizabeth said, voice trembling with anger and heartbreak. Her eyes flicked to Caroline, who was staring back, uncertain whether to maintain her composure or flee. The hush deepened, the only sound a faint clink as Adrian set down his fork. A million unspoken words surged through Elizabeth's mind. She was here to drag their deceit into the spotlight, to show Adrian and Caroline that they could no longer hide. Adrian's mouth opened, but no words emerged. The weight of his double life bore down on him, evidenced by the flush creeping up his neck. In that pregnant moment, Elizabeth knew she was past any fear or doubt. She was prepared to let the pent-up fury of betrayal sweep through the lavish room, and in that determined stance, she felt a glimmer of liberation, as though reclaiming the power that had been stolen from her since the day she discovered Caroline's texts. The seconds ticked by in agonizing slow motion. A hush had enveloped the private dining suite, the violinist now standing awkwardly in a corner, his bow lowered. Every flicker of the candlelight seemed to magnify the tension. Elizabeth drew a shaky breath. "So, this is your business dinner, Adrian?" she asked, barely containing her rage. Her voice, though soft, radiated accusation. She turned her gaze to Caroline, who shrank back under the weight of Elizabeth's glare. "And you must be Caroline Gray, the woman you've been texting every night." Caroline's face lost its color. She glanced toward Adrian, clearly expecting him to take charge of the situation. Adrian rose from his seat, attempting to project authority, but his eyes betrayed panic. "Elizabeth," he began, voice low and rushed, "you didn't have to come here. We were just what?" Elizabeth's tone was razor-sharp. "Enjoying a romantic evening while your pregnant wife is home alone?" A muted gasp escaped Caroline's lips. Even she seemed unsettled by the revelation that Elizabeth was expecting a child. Adrian took a step forward, one hand outstretched, as if to placate Elizabeth. "Listen," he insisted, "this isn't what it looks like. Caroline is a valuable business contact." At that moment, Elizabeth reached her emotional breaking point. Weeks of suspicion, heartbreak, and humiliation ignited inside her like a firestorm. "Business contact?" she repeated, her fury boiling over. She lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the elegantly set table. Fine china clinked against crystal glasses in a precarious symphony. Caroline yelped in alarm. Adrian's eyes went wide. But Elizabeth, who had once prided herself on gentle composure, reached deep into her reservoir of righteous anger. In one swift motion, she flipped the table, sending porcelain plates, half-eaten gourmet dishes, and a chilled bottle of champagne crashing to the floor. A cacophony of shattering glass and silverware filled the room. Caroline leaped backward with a startled scream, wine splashing across her designer gown. Adrian stood there, dumbfounded, as foie gras and sauce dripped onto his polished shoes. For a moment, no one moved. The stunned silence was so total, it was as if the entire restaurant had gone mute. Elizabeth's chest heaved, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Part of her couldn't believe what she'd just done. She had never been the type to unleash such theatrics. Yet, the satisfaction of publicly exposing Adrian's betrayal was undeniable. She felt a flicker of triumph amidst her heartbreak. "From now on," she hissed, voice trembling, "you can explain to everyone in your precious social circle exactly why your wife caught you like this." She turned on Caroline, who stood trembling. "And you, I hope the business benefits are worth humiliating another woman, because that's the only thing you're going to be known for from now on." With that, Elizabeth spun around and stormed out of the suite. The traumatized violinist practically plastered himself against the wall to let her pass. Outside, a flurry of hushed whispers and sideways glances followed her through the restaurant, but she held her head high. She was done being polite and patient. She had dealt the final blow in a war she never wanted to fight, and for the first time. In a long time, she felt a sense of release, as if the weight of all her despair had been scattered across the broken dishes on the floor. The moment Elizabeth stepped onto the sidewalk, cool air hit her flushed cheeks. Samantha, who had been waiting nearby, rushed toward her. "Liz, are you okay?" she asked, arms wide to envelop her friend in a hug. Elizabeth nodded, tears now mingling with the adrenaline coursing through her. She felt spent, both physically and emotionally. Samantha guided her to the waiting car. "Let's get you somewhere safe," she murmured. "You don't need to go back to that penthouse if you don't want to." Elizabeth sank into the back seat, the weight of the evening's events crashing over her. She hadn't merely confronted Adrian, she had created a spectacle that would reverberate through social circles for weeks, possibly months. The Quinn name carried prestige, and gossip moved swiftly among the elite. She dreaded the onslaught of media headlines: millionaire husband, humiliated in high-end restaurant, wife overturns table in rage. Yet, strangely, she felt no regret for exposing the truth. Even as tears stung her eyes, she recognized a liberating sense of having taken back her voice. "Where to?" the driver asked. Samantha answered on Elizabeth's behalf, instructing him to head toward the Summers bookstore in Queens. Elizabeth yearned for the uncomplicated world of her childhood, if only for a night sleeping in her old bedroom, enveloped by the comforting smell of old books and her mother's homemade soup. Meanwhile, in the private dining suite of Le Papillon d'Or, chaos ensued. Adrian, covered in spilled champagne and sauce, berated the staff for not preventing his wife's sudden intrusion. He glared at Caroline, whose designer gown was ruined, a metallic odor of wine and fear lingering around her. The staff scrambled to salvage the situation, but the hush that fell over the entire establishment confirmed that everyone had heard the commotion. Adrian snarled at Caroline, "We need to leave now." Caroline, shaken and humiliated, tried to salvage her composure. "You said your wife would never do something like this," she hissed, grabbing her purse. Adrian didn't respond. He felt the precarious balance of his social image tilting precariously. Once news spread, his carefully cultivated persona of a shrewd but respectable businessman would take a massive hit. And Elizabeth, fiery, pregnant Elizabeth, was no longer safely out of sight. Back in the car, Elizabeth clung to Samantha's hand as the city lights blurred past her window. Every muscle in her body ached from tension. She trembled, worrying about her baby, about what this stress might do. Yet she couldn't ignore the flicker of relief that accompanied her tears. She had stood up for herself in a grand, undeniable gesture. For one night, at least, she felt she had broken free from the oppressive weight of Adrian's secrets. Samantha whispered reassuring words, promising to help Elizabeth navigate the storm that would inevitably follow. In that silent, dimly lit back seat, Elizabeth felt the unborn life inside her move again, as if gently affirming her choice to fight for a reality where neither she nor her child would ever be treated as disposable. The next morning, Elizabeth awoke in her childhood bedroom to the scent of fresh coffee and blueberry muffins wafting up from the bookstore's small cafe downstairs. For a fleeting moment, she felt a semblance of normalcy, as though she were a teenager again. But reality crashed back when she checked her phone. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and text messages flooded her notifications. "Are you okay?" Read one message from an old college friend, followed by a link to a tabloid article, "Billionaire hotelier Adrian Quinn. Embroiled in scandal, wife overturns dinner table in jealous rage." Elizabeth's stomach turned. She sank onto the edge of her bed, scanning the article. Sensationalist reporters had already dug up every detail they could find. Quotes from onlookers painted her as a scorned woman who had lost her temper. One line read, "Sources claim Mrs. Quinn is pregnant," which may have fueled the dramatic confrontation. Elizabeth felt her cheeks burn in anger and embarrassment. She despised that the public now saw her personal torment as entertainment. Downstairs, Margaret Summers waited in the bookstore cafe with a hot cup of tea and comforting arms. Elizabeth tearfully recounted the media onslaught, the incessant calls from unknown numbers, and the gnawing fear that Adrian might try to twist the narrative to protect his reputation. "You did what you had to do, honey," Margaret said, patting Elizabeth's hand. "No matter what they say, you stood up for yourself, and that's something to be proud of." Samantha chimed in, "We'll handle this together. Maybe you should talk to a lawyer and your OB-GYN to ensure you and the baby are fine after all this stress." Sure enough, Adrian's attempts to control the fallout arrived later that day. He texted Elizabeth in a string of frantic messages, "We need to talk immediately. You have to retract some of your statements. This bad press is affecting our stock prices. Think of our child's future. You're making a scene." The audacity of it all made Elizabeth's blood boil. He seemed more concerned about stocks and reputation than her emotional well-being or that of their unborn child. In a moment of resolve, she blocked his number. Let him squirm, let him deal with the tabloids and the whispers alone. She needed to protect her sanity and focus on her pregnancy. Margaret called an old family friend, attorney Jonathan Wong, who specialized in family law. Arrangements were made for a discreet meeting. Elizabeth knew the day might come when she had to legally protect herself and her baby, whether through separation, divorce, or some form of custody agreement. The thought was terrifying. She had once believed she and Adrian would remain partners for life, but illusions had dissolved the moment she discovered his infidelity. As she surveyed the cozy bookstore, her safe haven, and listened to the murmured conversations of customers flipping through novels, she felt a wave of bitter-sweet relief. The life she had cherished with Adrian might be over, but she was no longer trapped in a web of secrets. She had waged a dramatic war for her dignity, and though the media attacked her for it, she felt an unwavering sense of self-respect blooming within her. She was done playing the meek wife in the corner of a glitzy stage. Later that week, Elizabeth arrived at Jonathan Wong's law office, a modest but well-kept suite on the Upper East Side. Samantha accompanied her for emotional support, holding her hand as they ascended in the elevator. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish, and the walls were adorned with framed degrees and recognitions. Jonathan, a gentle-voiced man in his late 50s, welcomed them warmly. He had known the Summers family for decades, once helping them secure the lease for their bookstore amidst ruthless developers. His calm, steady demeanor instantly put Elizabeth at ease. After reviewing the situation, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, fingers tented thoughtfully. "It's clear Adrian's actions amount to marital misconduct," he said, "but the approach we take depends on what you ultimately want. Do you want a legal separation, a divorce, custody, negotiations, financial protections for your child?" Elizabeth clasped her hands in her lap. Though she'd braced for this, hearing the words aloud left her dizzy. "I need to focus on my baby," she managed softly. "I can't live in constant stress, wondering if Adrian and Caroline are still carrying on." Jonathan nodded understandingly. "If you want to pursue divorce, we'll need to consider alimony, child support, and property division. The Quinn family assets are substantial. If you'd rather attempt reconciliation, which, from the sound of things, might be difficult, we could draft a postnuptial agreement. Either way, Adrian doesn't have unlimited power, especially once this scandal has erupted publicly." Samantha squeezed Elizabeth's hand for reassurance. "Remember, you're not alone," she whispered. Elizabeth offered a weak smile, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. She thought back to all the times she'd tried to speak to Adrian, only to be brushed aside as though her concerns were trivial. Now she had legal backing, and for the first time it felt like a tangible shield against Adrian's influence. Over the next few days, Jonathan and his team investigated Adrian's finances to ensure transparency in case of a divorce filing. They also drew up initial custody considerations, which outlined that Elizabeth, as the baby's primary caregiver, would have significant legal advantages. Every step felt like trudging through molasses, exhausting, yet necessary. In a surprising turn of events, Elizabeth received calls of support from unlikely corners of Adrian's social circle, other wives and partners who had witnessed or experienced similar betrayals within high society. One woman, Catherine Hayes, confided that her own husband had flaunted multiple affairs, but coerced her into silence with threats of financial ruin. "What you did took courage," Catherine said in a hushed phone call. "You stood up for yourself in a way many of us wish we could." This growing chorus of solidarity emboldened Elizabeth. The humiliating press coverage no longer felt like a personal failure. Instead, it became a catalyst for shaking the foundations of her marriage's toxic status quo. In the quiet evenings at her parents' place, she held a hand protectively over her growing belly, determined to forge a future defined by dignity and self-worth, rather than subjugation to Adrian's whims. One crisp morning, about 2 weeks after the explosive dinner incident, Elizabeth's phone lit up with a number she no longer had saved, Adrian Quinn. She had blocked him, but he must have used a different line. After a moment of hesitation, she answered, mentally bracing herself for more ranting. "I want to talk," Adrian said abruptly, his voice devoid of its usual confidence. Face to face, without lawyers, just us. Elizabeth's heart fluttered with conflicting emotions, anger, heartbreak, and a trace of curiosity. She finally agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near the law office. Samantha insisted on waiting in a car nearby in case Elizabeth needed backup. So, on a brisk afternoon, Elizabeth found herself seated at a small corner table in Café Lumière, swirling a spoon in her chamomile tea. The cafe was mostly empty, the warm scent of baked goods drifting through the air. Adrian arrived wearing a tailored suit that only accentuated the dark circles under his eyes. He looked tired, his usual swagger subdued. He removed his coat, and they exchanged stiff greetings. The tension was palpable. Neither touched the pastries set before them. Finally, Adrian spoke. "Elizabeth, this has spiraled out of control. The media, the business, everything's in free fall." He paused, struggling to maintain composure. "I never wanted to hurt you like this. I just got carried away." And Elizabeth raised a hand, stopping him. "I'm not here to rehash how you ended up with Caroline. I'm here because I'm pregnant with your child, and we need to figure out how that impacts our futures." Adrian swallowed hard. She could tell he was used to controlling the narrative, smoothing over issues with power and charm. Now he was facing real consequences. "Look, I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know it doesn't fix what I did, but the negative press is tanking our hotel group's image. Investors are getting spooked. I'd like us to at least be civil for the sake of the baby and the business." Elizabeth studied him carefully. She noted the flicker in his eyes that might have been genuine remorse, but it was overshadowed by panic about his crumbling empire. Was he truly remorseful, or just desperate to salvage his public image? "Civil," Elizabeth repeated, her tone icy. "Did you give me civility when you lied about late-night meetings? When you flaunted Caroline at that restaurant? When you humiliated me and our unborn child in front of the world?" Adrian flinched. "I know, and I regret it. I do. But let's figure out a path forward. If you want a divorce, fine. I'll cooperate. But the tabloids are crucifying us. The negative press is hurting your reputation too. We should present a united front in public, at least until the scandal dies down." Elizabeth let silence stretch between them. The concept of presenting a united front rang hollow. Still, she had to consider practicalities. The scandal would follow her, whether or not she aligned with Adrian in the public eye. And she needed financial security for the baby. If temporary civility could facilitate a stable future for her child, perhaps it was worth negotiating. She leaned forward, voice low. "I'm willing to consider an arrangement, Adrian. But make no mistake, if you think this is a path to winning me back without changing, you're mistaken. I won't be your puppet wife to parade around while you chase your next thrill." Adrian nodded, lips pressed tight. He reached into his pocket and handed her a business card. "Have your attorney call mine," he said simply. "We'll work something out." Then, with a final, tentative glance at her, he slipped on his coat and left. Elizabeth exhaled a shaky breath, feeling as though she'd just navigated a battlefield. Whatever the outcome, she sensed this meeting had moved her one step closer to a resolution, painful though it might be. In the weeks following her tense meeting with Adrian, Elizabeth felt torn between the pull of the past and the promise of a different life. After multiple discussions among their lawyers, she and Adrian reached a tentative agreement, a public statement affirming they were working on their marriage and a set of legal provisions ensuring financial support for Elizabeth during her pregnancy. Both sides had their reasons. Adrian needed to placate jittery investors, while Elizabeth craved stability for her unborn child. Despite the outward show of cooperation, Elizabeth's private reality remained fraught with doubts. Could she ever truly trust a man who had so brazenly betrayed her? Did she even want to stay married to him? She found temporary solace in refurbishing her parents' bookstore. The upstairs loft had been converted into a reading lounge years ago, but Elizabeth poured new energy into it, painting the walls a soothing shade of light green, ordering comfortable chairs, and stocking the shelves with children's books for future story-time sessions, possibly even for her own child one day. One afternoon, as she stood atop a stepladder dusting shelves, Samantha rushed in. "Liz, you need to see this." She held out her phone, showing a tabloid website. Caroline Gray had given an exclusive interview, painting herself as a naive victim who had been led on by Adrian's empty promises of leaving his wife. She claimed to have broken off the affair to avoid further harm to the innocent child. The piece portrayed Adrian as a manipulative, power-obsessed cheat and Elizabeth as a tragic, unsuspecting spouse. For the first time, Caroline was publicly severing ties with Adrian and seeking sympathy. Elizabeth clicked the phone off, her emotions roiling. "So Caroline wants to salvage her image," she murmured. "She's framing herself as the wounded party." A swirl of conflicting feelings coursed through her: anger at the hypocrisy, relief that Caroline was out of the picture, and an odd sense of pity for a woman who had allowed herself to become a pawn in Adrian's world. Samantha gave Elizabeth a gentle, encouraging look. "What do you want to do with all this, Liz? Adrian's name is being dragged through the mud, and he's lost his mistress's support. Does that change anything for you?" Elizabeth stepped down from the ladder. She felt an unusual calm settle over her. Caroline's spin doesn't change the fact that Adrian lied. She's just another victim, in her own twisted way, of his narcissism. With a soft sigh, she continued, "I need to focus on my baby, Samantha. If Adrian truly changes, maybe we could find common ground in co-parenting. But I can't force him to be a different man, and I won't chain myself to him just for appearances." That evening, Elizabeth received a call from Adrian. His voice sounded hollow, the commanding luster gone. "Caroline's interview blindsided me," he admitted. "I'm sorry you had to see that." A part of Elizabeth felt vindicated, hearing him finally stripped of excuses, but she remained guarded. She offered no solace, only a measured response. "This is the reality you created, Adrian. I have to protect myself and our child now. You do what you must, but I've made my position clear." He started to speak, perhaps to plead or argue, but Elizabeth gently ended the call. Tears stung her eyes afterward, not because she regretted her words, but because the final vestiges of her storybook marriage had dissolved. However, in letting go of the fairy tale, she realized she was stepping into a future shaped by her own strength, and for once, that idea felt powerfully liberating. As Elizabeth entered her third trimester, her physical and emotional burdens increased. Daily routines became more strenuous, yet she found an odd solace in anticipating the baby's arrival. She set up a makeshift nursery in her childhood home, painting pastel murals of clouds and stars on the walls. Each night, she sang lullabies to her unborn child, promising them a life of love and stability, no matter what marital storms swirled around her. Adrian's once constant stream of texts and calls dwindled. He had retreated to damage control in his own life, trying to rebuild the Quinn Hotel Group's public image, placating stockholders and dodging paparazzi. The tabloids still occasionally flared with updated gossip, but the sensationalism was fading, replaced by newer scandals, capturing the media's short attention span. In the midst of this relative calm, Jonathan Wong called Elizabeth with an important update. Adrian's lawyer wants to finalize a postnuptial agreement, he explained over the phone. It guarantees substantial financial support for you and the baby, whether you remain married or not. But it also includes provisions that, if you were to initiate a divorce now, the Quinn family might drag out litigation unless you settle on certain terms. Elizabeth weighed her options carefully. The postnuptial agreement offered stability health insurance, child support, and a trust fund for the baby. Yet, it also implicitly suggested that Adrian was preparing for a scenario where the marriage might never truly recover. She met with Adrian in Jonathan's office to discuss the final details. He looked exhausted, but somewhat contrite, as if the steady erosion of his public image had brought him back down to earth. As they sat across from each other at the conference table, Elizabeth felt a pang of sadness. Once, they had shared a grand love story filled with candle-lit confessions, spontaneous adventures, and visions of a glamorous future. Now, they were reduced to calculating numbers and conditions on legal documents. He signed the papers with a resigned sigh. "I do want to be there for the baby, Elizabeth," he murmured, not quite meeting her eyes. "I'm not sure what that looks like now, but I'm not the monster people are painting me to be." She offered him a faint nod, unsure of how to respond. She could sense the complex swirl of regret, pride, and longing in his words. Leaving the office, Elizabeth felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. The postnuptial was a safety net, one that secured her and her child's future financially. But it also underscored that the marriage she once cherished had essentially died. She realized that perhaps the best she could hope for was a civil co-parenting relationship, one where resentment wouldn't overshadow the baby's life. That night, she lay in bed, one hand on her belly. She recalled the moment she flipped the table at Le Papillon d'Or, a fiery act driven by heartbreak. Strange as it seemed, she felt grateful for that impulsive outburst. It had been the spark that freed her from Adrian's web of deceit. Now, she stood on the brink of a new life, one not defined by wealth or appearances, but by self-respect, maternal love, and a fresh start on her own terms. The final weeks of Elizabeth's pregnancy passed in a blur of medical checkups, nursery preparations, and cautious hope. She found an unexpected sense of peace in her parents' bookstore, greeting regular customers who asked about the baby's progress. Even the looming presence of paparazzi had faded, replaced by the rhythms of ordinary life. When her contractions finally started late one evening, Elizabeth felt a jolt of anticipation and fear. Margaret rushed her to the hospital, with Samantha riding shotgun. In the bright, bustling maternity ward, Elizabeth was hooked up to monitors, the steady beeping matching the pounding of her heart. As the hours dragged, pain ebbed and flowed in fierce waves, but every contraction brought her closer to meeting the little one she had fought so hard to protect. Despite the bitterness she felt toward Adrian, she called him from the hospital, giving him a chance to be present for his child's birth. He arrived in haste, looking frazzled yet determined. For a fleeting moment, Elizabeth saw the man she used to love, vulnerable, hopeful, and afraid. He stood by her side through the final stages of labor, clinging to her hand, swallowing back tears when the baby's first cries pierced the air. "It's a girl," announced Dr. Rachel Peterson, gently placing the newborn in Elizabeth's arms. Tiny fingers curled around Elizabeth's thumb, and everything else, betrayals, headlines, Heartbreak faded into the background. Adrian hovered close, tears welling in his eyes. In that profound moment, all that mattered was the precious, fragile life between them. They named her Sophia Quinn Summers, blending both surnames as a testament to her dual heritage. Though Elizabeth remained guarded, she allowed Adrian a tentative bond with their daughter, watching him cradle Sophia with a trembling smile. Perhaps fatherhood would nudge him toward humility and genuine care. Time alone would tell. In the following days, Elizabeth recuperated, her hospital room brimming with flowers, congratulatory cards, and the gentle coos of her newborn. Her parents and Samantha took shifts, ensuring she never felt isolated. Adrian visited daily, carefully respecting Elizabeth's boundaries. He seemed genuinely taken with Sophia's every breath and yawn, though Elizabeth couldn't yet decipher if this signaled long-term change or fleeting novelty. On her final day in the hospital, Elizabeth looked out the window at the city skyline. Clouds drifted lazily, reflecting the slow, steady pace of life moving forward. Holding Sophia close, she whispered, "We're going to be okay, my little one." She knew she had decisions to make, whether to officially file for divorce, attempt a fragile reconciliation, or something in between. But for now, the only certainty was that her life and the life of her child would revolve around love, authenticity, and a refusal to ever be silenced by wealth or deceit again. In the months to come, Elizabeth would discover new facets of her self-strengths, born from the ashes of betrayal, capacities for forgiveness she had never known. Whether Adrian would walk beside them in the future or remain a distant figure in Sophia's life was a question no lawyer's contract could truly answer. What she did know was that she and her daughter would face the world head-on, with or without the Quinn name. And that, at last, was a future Elizabeth was ready to embrace. Thank you for joining me on this intense journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimately, self-discovery. Elizabeth's story reminds us that no amount of wealth or glamour can replace the honesty and respect needed to sustain a loving partnership. In standing her ground and protecting the life growing within her, she found the courage to reclaim her voice and, in doing so, offered her child a future free from deceit. If this dramatic tale resonated with you, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with someone who might need a reminder of their own strength, and subscribing to our channel. Your engagement helps us bring more stories of resilience and hope to life. Thank you once again for watching. And remember, even in the face of the deepest betrayal, we have the power to choose our own worth and forge a new path forward.